Don Carlo by Giuseppe Verdi. The synopsis is presented by Opera Inside, the online opera guide. The roles: Filippo II, King of Spain. Don Carlo, son and heir to the Spanish king. Rodrigo, Marquis of Posa. Grand Inquisitor, the Grand Inquisitor of Spain. Elizabeth, daughter of the French king. Princess of Eboli, confidant of Elizabeth's. Near the Fontainebleau Palace. It is winter and the rural population is starving and suffering from the consequences of the Spanish-French War. Elizabeth is hunting with her entourage. Don Carlo the Infant of Spain is on his way to the castle. There he should meet Elizabeth, his future bride. He sees her pass by with her entourage, and falls head over heels in love with her. At dusk, on his way to the castle, Don Carlo meets Elizabeth and her page Tibaldo, who have lost their way in the forest. When they see the stranger, Don Carlo reveals himself to be Spanish. While Tibaldo goes back to the castle to call for the palanquin, the two remain among themselves. Soon Elizabeth feels attracted to the Spaniard, and she realizes that she has met her future fiancé. She shall marry him to seal the peace treaty between Spain and France. The two joyfully sing of their love and their future marriage. When Tibaldo returns, he welcomes Elizabeth as queen and future wife of Philip II. Horrified, the two must realize that plans have changed and Elizabeth is now to marry Carlos' father. An envoy of Spain approaches them with his entourage. In the name of the king he proposes to her. With dying voice, Elizabeth says yes. In the monastery of San Justo, Don Carlo seeks there his peace of mind. He cannot forget the pain of the loss of Elizabeth. Suddenly he hears a familiar voice. His friend the Marquis of Posa has returned from Flanders and visits him in the monastery. Posa has heard of Don Carlo's fate. He persuades him to dedicate his life to Flanders, which is oppressed by the Inquisition. Don Carlo joins in enthusiastically, and the two of them swear eternal friendship. Soon Elizabeth and the king arrive at the monastery. When the eyes of Don Carlo and Elizabeth meet, they both tremble. The queen returns to the retinue. Shortly thereafter, Posa appears with a letter from the King of France and secretly hands the queen a second letter from Don Carlo, hidden in the box. It says, "By the memory that unites us both, trust this man, Carlo." Posa asks the queen to receive Don Carlo, as he is suffering from the alienation from his father. With beating hearts, Elizabeth grants this request to Posa. Her confidant, the Princess of Eboli, who is witness to the conversation, has fallen in love with Don Carlo and asks herself whether he might reciprocate her feelings. Don Carlo appears. Elizabeth sends her escort away and Don Carlo asks Elizabeth to lobby for him to be sent to Flanders as governor. Elizabeth agrees. Emotions overpower Carlo and he summons her love. Elizabeth has difficulty maintaining her posture. She does not respond to it out of a sense of duty. Don Carlo runs out of the room. The king appears and finds the queen unaccompanied. This is against etiquette and he sends the queen's companion and best friend back to France as punishment. Humiliated, Elizabeth bids farewell to the faithful. When everyone has to leave the room, the king asks Posa to stay. Posa tells of the misery of the Flemish people, and accuses Philip of the reign of terror of the Spanish crown. He pleads for the freedom of the Flemish people. Philip dismisses this and does not want to hear of this betrayal. He warns Posa to beware of the Grand Inquisitor. The king is impressed by Posa, who is not like all the other courtiers. He chooses the Marquis as an intimate and tells him about his suspicions, that the queen is in love with his son. He asks Posa to find out whether his suspicions are well founded. It's midnight. Don Carlo is in the gardens of the queen. He has received a letter for a meeting and awaits the Elizabeth. In fact, the letter was written by the Princess of Eboli, who appears in the queen's cloak. Carlo swears his love to her. When she reveals herself, Eboli learns that his love belongs to the queen. Posa appears and recognizes the delicacy of the situation. He pulls out his dagger to silence the princess so as not to endanger the queen. At Carlos' insistence, he changes his plan and lets her go despite her threats. He asks Carlo to hand over all compromising letters to him,
as he now has to expect surveillance. Don Carlo hesitates, but Posa invokes their friendship and Carlo hands him the letters that betray his relationship with the Flemish Protestants. In front of a cathedral in Valladolid, a large crowd awaits the burning of heretics in the presence of the king. A procession starts the solemn auto da fe. Flanders deputies interrupt the celebrations, appear before the king and ask for a mitigation of the cruel persecution in their home country. But Philip knows no mercy and has them removed. Blinded with rage, Don Carlo draws his sword against his father. Despite the king's orders, his guards dare not disarm Don Carlo. Philip asks Posa to take the sword from Don Carlo. At Posa's request, Don Carlo hands over his sword to him, overwhelmed by the pain. The king appoints the Marquis as Duke and Don Carlos is taken away. In the king's study, the morning begins to dawn and the king is sitting desperately at his table. Concern for his kingdom and the realization that Elizabeth never loved him grieve him too deeply. The king has sent for the Grand Inquisitor. He has come to the conclusion that his traitorous son must be executed and wants to know if the church will give its blessing. The Grand Inquisitor agrees. The Grand Inquisitor now addresses the king. He demands that the king hand over the more dangerous traitor, the Marquis of Posa, to the tribunal. The king refuses, and the Inquisitor threatens the king that he too is accountable to the Inquisition. So even the king must realize that he must bow to the power of the church. After the departure of the priest, Elizabeth rushes into the study. Her jewelry box was stolen. Horrified, she has to watch as the king puts the box on the table and breaks it open. Right on top he finds the portrait of the infant. Elizabeth claims to be pure. When Philip accuses her of adultery, Elizabeth faints and Philip realizes that he has gone too far. Posa and Aberli rush in and realize the situation in horror. Aberli repentantly confesses to the queen that it was she who had betrayed her, and handed the box over to the king. She also confesses that she seduced the king. The queen gives her the choice between monastery and exile. Aberli deeply regrets and as a last act she decides to save Don Carlo. In Don Carlo's prison cell, Posa visits him and reports that he has charged himself with the compromising letters and will soon be executed, so that the way is clear for Don Carlo to complete the liberation of Flanders. A shot sounds and hits Posa. He sinks to the ground. With his last ounce of strength, he tells Carlo that Elizabeth is expecting him at the convent of San Giusto. He says goodbye to his friend and dies. Philip appears to return the sword to his son, whose innocence appears to have been proven by the self-incrimination of Posa. But Carlo rejects him and Philip realizes that Posa has sacrificed himself. The angry people appear under Aberli's leadership and want to free Don Carlo. As the Grand Inquisitor appears, the people throw themselves on their knees. In the turmoil, Don Carlo can flee. In the monastery of San Giusto, Elizabeth wants to say goodbye to Don Carlo. She kneels in front of the tomb of Charles V. In her deathly longing she thinks back wistfully to her happy youth in France. When Don Carlo appears, he swears to continue the work of Posa and says goodbye to Elizabeth. Philip appears accompanied by the Grand Inquisitor. They want to bring Elizabeth and Don Carlo to justice. Then the tomb of Charles V opens and a monk appears. Under the king's horrified gaze he drags Don Carlo into the monastery.
www.operaInside.com. All about operas. Learn more about this great opera, with interesting facts and great YouTube videos. Visit us.